My boss's wife secretly planned to kill him for the insurance. I found out just in time, but her web of lies went far deeper than anyone thought. The wife of my boss was withdrawing all the money from his card for his insurance, but he didn't know about it. My detective found out that she wants to him and collect the insurance for herself. By the time I returned to my hotel, the city lights were casting long shadows over the streets. I dropped my bag in the corner, sank onto the edge of the bed, and stared at the ceiling. The weight of everything, the surveillance, the ethical gray zones, pressed down on me. This wasn't a typical job, and it hadn't been for a while. Something about Adam had thrown me off my usual game. Maybe it was his earnestness, his dedication to his wife. Or perhaps it was the way his life seemed so unnecessarily complicated. What I couldn't shake was the lingering feeling that this case was more about Laura than it was about Adam. She was the one who had hired us, after all, and from what I'd seen, she had her own share of secrets. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Jason. "Any updates?" I sighed, typing back a quick response. Still nothing concrete. "Adam's clean so far." Jason's reply was swift. "Keep at it. He's hiding something. They all are." It wasn't like Jason to be so relentless. Usually, if a case wasn't yielding results after a certain point, we'd close it, hand over whatever evidence we had, and move on to the next one. But for some reason, he was fixated on Adam, determined to dig deeper, to find some dirt. It didn't sit well with me. I stood up, pacing the room. My mind drifted back to Laura. She was the key to all of this. I was sure of it. If I could just figure out what she was hiding, the rest would fall into place. But to do that, I'd have to dig deeper into her life. And that meant crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Still, I had to try. I grabbed my laptop, sat down at the desk, and started searching. I knew Laura had been married before, but I hadn't found much about her previous relationship. I needed to know more about Robert Perkins, her ex-husband. If there was any dirt on Laura, it would likely be buried in her past. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Robert Perkins had been a successful businessman, running a chain of luxury car dealerships in the Midwest. His company had thrived for years. But then, about 6 years ago, everything had fallen apart. There were rumors of financial mismanagement, lawsuits, and a nasty divorce. The court records were sealed, but there were enough whispers online to piece together a rough picture. Laura had left him just as his business was collapsing. Some speculated that she had been the cause of his downfall, that she had siphoned money from the company and left him high and dry. Others said that Robert had been the one at fault, that he had been involved in some shady dealings, and Laura had simply jumped ship before the whole thing went under. But the most interesting detail was this. After the divorce, Robert had disappeared. No one knew where he had gone, and his business had been sold off in pieces. There were no public records of him after that. No social media, no addresses, nothing. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers on the desk. This was starting to make sense. Laura had a history of being involved with powerful men, and when things went south, she cut ties and moved on. Adam was her next target, but unlike Robert, he didn't have the same kind of wealth or connections. If she was trying to pull the same stunt, it wasn't going to work this time. Adam wasn't the type to get caught up in her web of lies. But what was her end game? Was she trying to push Adam out of the picture so she could move on to someone else? Or was there something more sinister at play? I needed to talk to her. Confronting Laura directly wasn't part of the plan. But if I wanted answers, I didn't have much of a choice. The next morning, I drove to Laura's house. It was a modest suburban home, nothing flashy, nothing that stood out. I parked across the street and watched for a few minutes. There were no signs of movement inside. I knew Adam was still at the convention, so she was likely home alone. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked up to the front door. I knocked twice, then waited. After a few moments, I heard footsteps approaching. The door creaked open and Laura stood there, looking surprised to see me. "Claire?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, trying to keep things casual. I wanted to talk to you about the case. Do you have a few minutes? Laura hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone else was home. Then she nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. The inside of the house was neat and tidy, but it felt cold and personal. There were no family photos on the walls, no signs of a life shared with someone else. It was as if Laura had intentionally erased any trace of Adam from her home. We sat down in the living room and I cut straight to the point. Laura, I've been looking into Adam's activities and I haven't found any evidence that he's been unfaithful. Laura's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something. Maybe frustration, maybe fear. Cross her face. I see, she said calmly. Well, sometimes these things take time. I'm sure if you keep looking, you'll find something. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. Laura, are you sure it's Adam we should be looking at? For the first time, Laura's composure cracked, her eyes widened slightly, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. What do you mean? I mean, are you hiding something? I asked, my voice steady. Because if there's more to this story, now's the time to tell me. Laura's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might kick me out. But then she sighed, leaning back and crossing her arms. You think you know everything, don't you? She said, her voice laced with bitterness. You think you can just waltz in here and figure me out? Well, you're wrong. I didn't say anything, letting the silence stretch between us until Laura finally broke. Fine, she said, her voice low. You want the truth? Adam and I are done. He just doesn't know it yet. My heart raced. This was what I had been waiting for. He's a good man, Laura continued. But he's weak. He doesn't have what it takes to make it in this world. I gave him everything. My time. My energy. My support. And what did I get in return? Nothing. He's been dragging me down for years and I'm done. So why hire us? I asked. Why go through the trouble of investigating him? Laura's lips curled into a cold smile. Because I needed to be sure. I needed to know if he was cheating, if he had already checked out of this marriage. And if he wasn't, well, then I'd have to take matters into my own hands. I frowned, trying to piece together what she was saying. What do you mean? Laura stood up, walking over to the window and staring out at the street. Do you know what it's like to be trapped in a marriage with someone you don't love anymore? To feel like you're wasting your life with someone who doesn't understand you? I didn't answer. I knew Laura wasn't really asking me. She was just venting her frustrations. I have plans, Claire, she said, her voice growing colder. Big plans. And Adam isn't part of them. He never was. I stood up, my instincts on high alert. There was something off about the way Laura was talking. Something dangerous. What are you planning, Laura? She turned to face me, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. Something dark. I'm going to end this, she said simply. One way or another, Adam and I are through. And when it's over, I'll be free. Free? What did she mean by that? Before I could ask, Laura's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen and frowned. I have to go, she said abruptly. But don't worry, Claire. You'll get your answer soon enough. I didn't like the sound of that. As Laura walked me to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into something far more dangerous than a simple infidelity case. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying the conversation with Laura over and over again. Something was seriously wrong. She wasn't just planning to leave Adam. There was something more. Something sinister. But I couldn't figure out what it was. The next morning, I got a call from Jason. We need to meet, he said, his voice tense. I've got some new information. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, Jason was already there, looking uncharacteristically serious. He had a folder in front of him, and as soon as I sat down, he slid it across the table. Take a look, he said. I opened the folder and started reading. Inside were financial records, bank statements, and emails. As I scanned through them, my stomach dropped. It was all there. The proof I had been missing. Laura had been siphoning money from Adam's business accounts for months, slowly transferring it to offshore accounts in her name. She had been planning this for a long time, quietly setting herself up to disappear once she had drained enough funds. She's been planning to leave him for a while, Jason said quietly. But that's not all. He handed me another document, a life insurance policy in Adam's name, with Laura as the sole beneficiary. The policy had been updated just a few weeks ago, increasing the payout significantly. I felt sick. She's going to kill him, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a freight train. Jason nodded grimly. That's what it looks like. I stood up abruptly, pacing the small space beside the table. This was worse than I had imagined. Laura wasn't just trying to leave Adam. She was planning to take everything from him, including his life. We have to stop her, I said, my voice urgent. We have to warn Adam. Jason shook his head. We don't have enough proof yet. We can't just go to the police with this. They won't act unless we have something concrete. Then we need to get proof, I said, determined. We need to catch her in the act. Jason agreed, and we quickly formulated a plan. We would continue monitoring Laura's activities, hoping to catch her making a move. In the meantime, I would try to warn Adam without tipping Laura off. I left the coffee shop feeling more determined than ever. I wasn't going to let Laura get away with this. Over the next few days, I followed Laura's every move. She was careful, methodical, but I could sense that she was getting closer to putting her plan into action. She met with shady contacts in dark alleys, made secret phone calls, and continued siphoning money from Adam's accounts. But despite my best efforts, I couldn't find anything concrete. Nothing that would hold up in court. And then, one night, everything changed. It was late, and I was sitting in my car outside Laura's house, watching as she packed a small suitcase into the trunk of her car. I'd been following her for days, waiting for her to make a move, and now it looked like she was finally about to. I grabbed my phone and dialed Jason's number. She's on the move, I said as soon as he answered. I'm following her now. Be careful, Jason warned. We don't know what she's planning. I hung up and started my car, keeping a safe distance as Laura drove through the city. She was headed toward a remote part of town, an area I wasn't familiar with. As we got closer, I realized we were approaching a large industrial warehouse. Laura parked her car near the entrance and got out, carrying her suitcase with her. I parked a few blocks away, grabbing my camera and following her on foot. The warehouse was dark and foreboding, with no signs of activity. Laura disappeared inside, and I waited a few moments before following her in. The inside of the warehouse was cold and dimly lit. I could hear the faint sound of voices echoing through the large, empty space. I moved quietly, staying in the shadows as I made my way deeper inside. Finally, I reached a large room at the back of the warehouse. Laura was standing in the center, talking to a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, with a rough demeanor and a scar running down the side of his face. I stayed hidden, listening to their conversation. Is everything ready? Laura asked, her voice low. The man nodded. Yeah, everything's set. Just give the word, and it'll be done. I felt a chill run down my spine. They were talking about Adam. Good, Laura said, her voice cold and detached. Make sure it looks like an accident. I don't want any loose ends. I pulled out my camera, snapping a few quick photos. This was the proof I needed. But as I turned to leave, I accidentally knocked over a stack of crates, sending them crashing to the ground. Laura and the man whipped around, their eyes locking onto me. Who's there? Laura demanded, her voice sharp. I didn't wait to find out what they would do next. I bolted, sprinting through the warehouse and back out into the night. I could hear footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop. My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I ran for my life. I reached my car and jumped inside, slamming the door shut and peeling out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man standing at the entrance of the warehouse, watching me drive away. I drove straight to Jason's office, my hands shaking as I handed him the camera. "We've got her," I said, breathless. "She's planning to kill him." Jason reviewed the photos, his expression grim. "This is it," he said. "This is what we needed." The evidence was damning. With the photos in hand, Jason wasted no time contacting the authorities. They needed to move quickly before Laura could carry out her plan. I felt a mixture of relief and fear as the realization of what was unfolding hit me. The pieces were coming together, but we weren't out of danger yet. Adam was still in the dark, and until he was safe, I couldn't shake the sense of urgency. The police needed time to set up surveillance and secure a warrant for Laura's arrest. Jason warned me to keep a low profile while they moved in, but I couldn't sit back and wait. Adam deserved to know what was happening. He deserved to know the truth. I took a deep breath and made the decision to confront him. The risk was worth it. I needed to be the one to tell him, not the authorities, not after everything I had seen. That evening, I arrived at Adam's hotel. The convention was still in full swing, and the lobby was bustling with people dressed in business attire. I made my way to the elevator, my heart pounding in my chest. Would he even believe me? I didn't know, but I had to try. When I reached Adam's floor, I hesitated for a moment before knocking on his door. A few seconds passed before it swung open, and there he stood, looking tired and somewhat confused to see me. "Claire?" he said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said quickly, my voice low. "It's important." Adam's brows furrowed, but he stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The room was neatly organized. His laptop and papers spread out on the desk, probably from a long day of meetings. The tension in the air was palpable as I turned to face him. "Is something wrong?" he asked, closing the door behind him. I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain everything. "It's about Laura. She's not who you think she is." Adam's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, unsure how to begin, but then the words came tumbling out. "Laura hired me to investigate you. She's been siphoning money from your accounts, setting up offshore accounts in her name. She's planning to leave you, Adam, and it's worse than that. She's been plotting to kill you." Adam's face drained of color, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What? That's impossible. Laura wouldn't. She wouldn't do that." "I know it sounds insane," I said quickly, pulling out my phone and showing him the photos I had taken at the warehouse. "But we have proof. She met with a man last night to finalize the plan. She was going to make it look like an accident." Adam stared at the photos, his hands trembling slightly as he processed what I was telling him. His face contorted with a mix of shock and horror. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why would she do this?" I stepped closer, my voice soft but firm. "She's been planning this for a long time. She's been using you, Adam. She wanted out, but she wanted to take everything with her. Your money, your life insurance policy. She even increased the payout just a few weeks ago. She was setting you up." Adam stumbled back, sinking onto the edge of the bed. He buried his face in his hands, struggling to wrap his mind around what I was saying. I thought we were just going through a rough patch," he muttered. "I never imagined she would do this." I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Adam. I know this is a lot to take in." For a few minutes, we sat in silence. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he replayed the last few months of his life, trying to make sense of it all. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a combination of pain and anger. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice shaky but resolute. "The police are moving in," I explained. "They're going to arrest her soon, but you need to stay safe. You need to get out of here, somewhere she can't find you." Adam nodded slowly, standing up and grabbing a small bag from the closet. He moved with purpose, packing a few essentials while I called Jason to update him. Once Adam was ready, we left the hotel and headed to a safe location, a small cabin just outside the city, owned by one of Jason's contacts. It wasn't luxurious, but it was remote and secure. As we drove, Adam remained silent, staring out the window. I couldn't imagine what he was going through, realizing that the woman he had loved and trusted was planning to betray him in the most horrific way. I wanted to say something comforting, but I knew there were no words that could ease the pain he was feeling. When we finally arrived at the cabin, Adam collapsed onto the worn-out couch, exhausted both physically and emotionally. I sat across from him, unsure of what to do next. My job was technically over. I had done what I was hired to do, but I couldn't just leave him like this. Not yet. After a long silence, Adam spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. How did it come to this? What did I do wrong? You didn't do anything wrong, I said gently. This is on Laura, not you. He shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. I loved her. I gave her everything I had. How could she betray me like this? I didn't have an answer. Sometimes there were no answers, only painful truths. Laura had made her choices, and Adam was left to pick up the pieces. For the next few hours, we sat in the cabin, waiting for news. Jason had promised to call as soon as the police had Laura in custody, but the wait felt endless. Adam paced the room restlessly, while I tried to distract myself by flipping through an old magazine I had found on a coffee table. Neither of us could focus. Finally, around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Jason. They got her, he said, his voice sounding tired but relieved. She's in custody. They'll be questioning her tomorrow. I relayed the news to Adam, who sank back onto the couch, visibly relieved. But the weight of what had happened still hung in the air. This wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up early to find Adam already sitting outside on the porch, staring out at the woods. His eyes were bloodshot, and I could tell he hadn't slept at all. I sat beside him, the cool morning air biting at my skin. Are you okay? I asked softly. Adam didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before finally speaking. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know how to feel right now. Part of me is angry at her, at myself, at everything. But another part of me just feels empty. I nodded, understanding his conflicted emotions. It's okay to feel that way. You've been through a lot. He was silent for a long time, then turned to me with a look of determination in his eyes. I want to see her. I blinked, caught off guard. What? I need to see her, he repeated. I need to understand why she did this. I need to hear it from her. I hesitated, unsure if that was a good idea. Confronting Laura could be dangerous, emotionally and psychologically. But I also knew that Adam wasn't going to find peace until he had closure. All right, I said slowly. But you can't go alone. I'll go with you. Adam nodded, grateful for the support. Later that afternoon, we drove to the police station where Laura was being held. I could feel the tension radiating from Adam as we entered the building. The officers led us to a small, sterile room with a single table and 2 chairs. Laura was already there, her hands cuffed to the table. She looked different, pale, disheveled, and defeated. When she saw Adam, her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her expression, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. Adam sat down across from her, his jaw clenched. I stood by the door, ready to step in if things got out of hand. Why? Adam asked, his voice steady but filled with pain. Why did you do this, Laura? Laura stared at him for a long moment before responding. Because I had to, she said, her voice cold and emotionless. You wouldn't understand. Try me, Adam said, his eyes locked on hers. Laura sighed, leaning back in her chair. You were holding me back, Adam. I had dreams, ambitions, but you were content with your mediocre life. I wanted more. I deserved more. And that's why you tried to kill me? Adam asked, his voice rising with anger. Because I wasn't enough for you? Laura's lips curled into a bitter smile. You were never enough, Adam. You never would be. The words hit Adam like a physical blow, and I saw the pain flash across his face. He stood up abruptly, unable to sit there any longer. "I loved you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I would have done anything for you." Laura didn't respond, her cold gaze fixed on him. Without another word, Adam turned and walked out the room. I followed him, leaving Laura behind. The door closed with a heavy thud, and I knew the chapter of Adam's life was finally over. The days that followed were a blur. Adam tried to rebuild his life, but the damage Laura had done would take time to heal. The media caught wind of the story, and for a brief period, Adam became the focus of public sympathy. Everyone wanted to know how a seemingly perfect marriage had crumbled so spectacularly. I stayed in touch with him, offering support when he needed it. Our relationship had shifted from professional to something more personal, though I couldn't quite define what it was. We had been through something intense together, and that kind of bond wasn't easily broken. One evening, a few weeks after Laura's arrest, Adam called me. His voice sounded lighter, more at peace than I had heard in a long time. "I've decided to move," he said. "I need a fresh start, away from all of this." "Where will you go?" I asked. "Not sure yet," he admitted, "but I think it's time for a new chapter." I smiled, happy for him. "That sounds like a good idea." There was a brief pause before Adam spoke again, his tone more serious. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you, Claire. Thank you." I felt a warmth spread through my chest at his words. "You're welcome, Adam. I'm glad I could help." We said our goodbyes, and as I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure myself. The case had been one of the most challenging I had ever worked on, but in the end, justice had been served. Adam was free, and Laura was facing the consequences of her actions. As for me, I knew there would be more cases, more mysteries to solve, and more lives to untangle. But for now, I was content to take a breath and let the dust settle. Life had a funny way of throwing curveballs, and I had learned to roll with them. But no matter what came next, I knew one thing for certain. I had done the right thing, and that was enough. Months passed, and I found myself thinking less and less about the case. Adam had moved to a small coastal town, far away from the city, and the chaos that had once consumed his life. He sent me the occasional email, updating me on how things were going. He was doing well, all things considered. He had even started dating again, though he was taking it slow this time. As for Laura, she had been sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Her trial had been quick, the evidence against her overwhelming. There had been no dramatic courtroom scenes, no final confessions. In the end, she had accepted her fate with the same cold detachment she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. I had moved on to other cases, each one presenting its own set of challenges and ethical dilemmas. But none had been quite like Adam's. None had shaken me to my core the way that one had. One evening, as I sat at my desk, reviewing the details of a new investigation, I received a message from Jason. "Good work on the Adam case," it read. "You handled it well." I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of pride. It wasn't often that Jason gave compliments, so when he did, they carried weight. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the city skyline. The night was calm, the lights twinkling in the distance. It felt like a new beginning, not just for Adam, but for me as well. And as I sat there, I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready. Life had settled back into a familiar rhythm. After Adam's case, I took on a few smaller jobs, nothing too complex or emotionally taxing. The routine was comforting. Investigating insurance fraud or corporate espionage was predictable. They were the types of cases where the stakes weren't life or death, and more importantly, there was no deep personal betrayal involved. It was almost like I was deliberately keeping myself away from any case that felt too personal. But that peace wasn't going to last long. It started on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. My phone buzzed while I was in the middle of a report about a potential embezzlement scheme at a mid-sized tech company. When I saw the caller ID, my stomach dropped. It was Jason. Normally, I'd pick up without hesitation, but something about the timing felt off. I sighed and hit answer. "Claire," Jason's voice crackled over the line. "We've got a situation." I leaned back in my chair, already knowing that whatever he was about to say wasn't good. What's going on? I need you to come into the office. Now, this is big. The urgency in his voice sent my mind racing. Jason wasn't one for dramatics, and for him to sound this serious, it had to be something major. I grabbed my jacket, shut down my laptop, and headed out the door. The drive to Jason's office felt longer than usual. Traffic crawled, and I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. By the time I parked my car and walked into the building, my heart was pounding in my chest. Jason was waiting for me in his office, pacing behind his desk. His usually composed demeanor had shifted. He looked agitated, maybe even a little scared. What's going on? I asked as I closed the door behind me. Jason didn't waste any time. It's about Adam. I froze. Adam? What could possibly be wrong with him now? The last I had heard, he was doing fine, enjoying his new life away from all the chaos. What happened? I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. Jason ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. He's missing. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Missing? How? He was supposed to check in with me a few days ago, Jason explained. We've kept in touch, just to make sure everything was okay. But when I didn't hear from him, I started digging around. I contacted a few people in the area where he moved. No one's seen him in days. His phone's off, his house is empty, and there's no sign of him anywhere. I sat down in the chair across from Jason's desk, trying to process what to say. Adam was missing, after everything he'd been through. Now this, do you think something happened to him? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Jason sat down across from me, his expression grim. I don't know, but I've got a bad feeling about this, and I think we need to figure out what's going on before it's too late. I nodded, my mind already racing through the possibilities. Could Laura have had something to do with this? No, she was in prison. There was no way she could have orchestrated anything from behind bars, at least not without help. What do you need from me? I asked, already knowing the answer. I need you to find him, Jason said simply. I know you're the best chance we've got. I didn't hesitate. I'll head out there first thing in the morning. Jason handed me a file with everything he had gathered so far. Adam's last known whereabouts, phone records, and a list of people he had been in contact with before he disappeared. As I flipped through the pages, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to be even more complicated than it seemed. You'll be careful, right? Jason added, his voice softening. I looked up at him, offering a small smile. Always. The next morning, I was on the road, heading to the small coastal town where Adam had been living. It was a quiet place, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and strangers stuck out like a sore thumb. As I pulled into town, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The last time I had seen Adam, he had been hopeful, ready to start fresh, to put everything behind him. Now he was missing, and I was the one who had to find him. I checked into a small motel on the edge of town and immediately started making calls. I began with the few people Jason had mentioned in his notes, Adam's landlord, his neighbors, and a couple of acquaintances he had made since moving to the area. Most of them had the same story. They hadn't seen Adam in days, and they were starting to get worried. He wasn't the type to just disappear without telling anyone. My next stop was Adam's house. It was a small, unassuming place on the outskirts of town, surrounded by trees and set back from the main road. As I pulled into the driveway, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was off. The house was dark, the curtains drawn, and there were no signs of life. I stepped out of the car and approached the front door, knocking twice. No answer. I tried the handle, but it was locked. After circling around the house, I found a side window that was slightly ajar. It wasn't the most professional way to enter, but I wasn't about to wait around for permission. Once inside, I could see that the house was in perfect order. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, nothing out of place. It was almost as if Adam had just walked out and never returned. I made my way through the rooms, searching for anything that might give me a clue as to where he had gone. His phone wasn't there, but I found his laptop on the kitchen counter. I powered it on, hoping there might be something useful on it, but it was password protected. Frustrated, I continued my search, eventually finding a small notebook tucked into a drawer in his office. The pages were filled with random notes, addresses, phone numbers, things he needed to do. But one page stood out. It was a list of names, most of which I didn't recognize. But there was one name that made my blood run cold. Laura. Why was Laura's name on this list? Had Adam been in contact with her? How? She was in prison. Or had someone else been reaching out to him on her behalf? I snapped a photo of the page with my phone and slipped the notebook into my bag. This was starting to feel like more than just a missing person case. After leaving Adam's house, I decided to pay a visit to the local police station. I needed to know if they were aware of Adam's disappearance, and if they had any information that could help. The station was small, just a couple of officers on duty. The chief, a gruff-looking man in his late 50s, greeted me with a skeptical look when I told him who I was and why I was there. "So you're a private investigator?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "And you think something's happened to Adam?" "I do," I said, keeping my tone professional. "He's been missing for days, and no one seems to know where he is." The chief scratched his chin, clearly not convinced. "Adam's a grown man. People disappear all the time. Doesn't mean they're in trouble." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "I understand that, but this isn't like him. He wouldn't just vanish without telling anyone." The chief sighed, glancing down at the paperwork on his desk. "Look, I'll keep an eye out, but unless we have reason to believe there's foul play, there's not much I can do." "You want to investigate on your own?" "Fine. Just stay out of my way." It wasn't the answer I had hoped for, but it was better than nothing. I spent the rest of the day going over the information I had gathered, trying to make sense of it all. Laura's name on Adam's list was troubling, but I couldn't figure out how she fit into all of this. She was behind bars, wasn't she? That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying everything I knew about the case, trying to connect the dots. Something was missing, something crucial, and I couldn't rest until I figured out what it was. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Jason. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice tense. "What is it?" "I just got word that Laura's been released." I nearly dropped the phone. "What? How?" "She was supposed to be serving a long sentence. Apparently, she got out on a technicality," Jason explained. "Some kind of legal loophole. I don't have all the details yet, but she's out." My blood ran cold. Laura was out of prison, and Adam was missing. This couldn't be a coincidence. "I think she's involved in Adam's disappearance," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. Jason was silent for a moment before speaking. "I think you're right, but we need proof." "I'm going to find her," I said firmly. "I'll get the proof we need." "Be careful, Claire," Jason warned. "Laura's dangerous." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. If Laura was out, she could be anywhere. But I had a feeling she wasn't far. She still had unfinished business with Adam, and I was determined to stop her before it was too late. I spent the next few days combing through every lead I could find, trying to track down Laura. It wasn't easy. She had disappeared without a trace, and no one seemed to know where she was. But I wasn't about to give up. I had to find her before she found Adam. It wasn't until I received an anonymous tip that things started to come together. A man claiming to know Laura's whereabouts called me late one night, his voice shaky and nervous. He wouldn't give me his name, but he told me that Laura had been seen in a small cabin outside of town, a cabin that belonged to a former acquaintance of hers. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to check it out. I packed my things and headed to the location the caller had given me. The cabin was isolated, nestled deep in it was the perfect place to hide. As I approached the cabin, I kept my distance, parking my car a good distance away, and walking the rest of the way on foot. I needed to be careful. I had no idea what I was walking into. The cabin was dark, but as I got closer, I could see a faint light coming from one of the windows. I crouched down, moving quietly, and peered inside. What I saw made my heart stop. Adam was inside, tied to a chair, his face bruised and swollen. Laura stood over him, her expression cold and calculating. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the fear in Adam's eyes. Laura was saying something to him, her voice sharp and commanding, but Adam didn't respond. He looked defeated, broken. I had to act fast. There was no time to call the police. By the time they arrived, it could be too late. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. Slowly, I moved toward the front door, trying to keep my movements silent. I didn't have a weapon, but I knew I had to find a way to distract Laura long enough to free Adam. As I reached for the door handle, a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. Laura's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she glanced toward the window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Had she seen me? For a moment, everything was silent. Then, without warning, the door flew open, and Laura was standing there, her eyes blazing with fury. "You," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. I didn't have time to react before Laura lunged at me, grabbing me by the arm and dragging me inside the cabin. I struggled, trying to break free, but she was stronger than I'd expected. "What are you doing here?" Laura demanded, her grip tightening on my arm. "I'm here for Adam," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "Let him go." Laura laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You think you can just waltz in here and save him? You have no idea what you're dealing with." I glanced over at Adam, who was watching the scene unfold with wide, terrified eyes. I had to get him out of here, but I didn't know how. Laura pulled a knife from her belt, holding it up to my throat. "You should have stayed out of this, Claire. You had no business getting involved." I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. "You don't have to do this, Laura. It's not too late to walk away." "Walk away?" Laura spat, her voice filled with rage. "Do you have any idea what I've been through? What Adam put me through? He deserves this. Whatever happened between you two, this isn't the answer," I said, my voice firm. "Let him go, and we can figure this out." For a moment, Laura hesitated, her grip on the knife loosening ever so slightly. But then, her face hardened, and I knew there was no reasoning with her. "Now," she said coldly. "It's too late." Before I could react, Laura shoved me to the ground and turned back to Adam, raising the knife above her head. "No." I screamed, scrambling to my feet. Without thinking, I lunged at Laura, grabbing her arm just as she brought the knife down. We struggled, the knife inches away from Adam's chest. I used all my strength to twist Laura's arm, forcing the knife out of her hand. Laura let out a furious scream, turning on me with a wild look in her eyes. She threw a punch, hitting me square in the jaw, but I didn't back down. I fought back, wrestling her to the ground. We struggled for what felt like an eternity, but finally, I managed to pin her down, my hands shaking with adrenaline. "Stay down," I growled, pressing her wrist to the floor. Laura thrashed beneath me, her eyes filled with hatred. "You ruined everything," she spat. "You and Adam." I didn't respond. I was too focused on keeping her subdued until help arrived. Finally, after what felt like hours, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The police were coming. By the time the officers burst into the cabin, Laura had stopped struggling. They quickly took her into custody, and I rushed over to Adam, untying the ropes that bound him to the chair. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking. Adam nodded weakly, his face pale. "I think so," he whispered. As the police led Laura out of the cabin, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. It was over. Adam was safe, but as I looked down at him, I knew that this was just the beginning of his healing process. The physical wounds would heal, but the emotional scars would take much longer. In the weeks that followed, Adam and I kept in touch. He was slowly recovering from the ordeal, both physically and emotionally. We met for coffee a few times, and each time I could see a little more of the old Adam returning. The man who had been full of hope and ready to start a new life. As for Laura, she was facing a long prison sentence for her crimes. This time, there would be no technicalities, no loopholes. She was going away for a long time. One evening, as Adam and I sat in a quiet cafe, he looked at me with a grateful smile. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly. "You saved my life, Claire." I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "You don't have to thank me, Adam. I'm just glad you're okay." He nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know what's next for me, but I'm ready to figure it out, one step at a time." I reached across the table, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "You'll be okay." "I know you will." As we sat there, sipping our coffee, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The case had been long and difficult, but it was finally over. Adam was safe, and Laura was no longer a threat. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace, and I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. Time has a way of healing wounds, but not always in the way you expect. For months after Laura's arrest and Adam's eventual recovery, I returned to my normal routine, accepting cases and staying busy. Yet a part of me kept replaying the events that had unfolded. How close Adam had come to losing everything, and how deeply Laura's betrayal had cut him. It wasn't just another job for me. Adam's case had left a lasting impact. Several months passed without any word from Adam. I knew he needed his space, and I had made peace with that. Sometimes it's best to let people rebuild their lives on their own terms. I continued taking smaller cases, the kind that didn't stir up old emotions or make me question my sense of morality. Insurance fraud, background checks, mundane, simple, and clean. But despite the routine, the quiet after the storm, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling that there was something unfinished. And that feeling became unavoidable one crisp fall morning when I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line simply read, "It's time to talk." I hesitated before opening it. The body of the email was brief: "Claire, meet me at the old pier. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. There's something you need to know." Adam, I hadn't expected to hear from him again. Not like this. The old pier was a secluded spot in the city, where the sea stretched out into the horizon, and where the bustling energy of the town seemed to fade away. I hadn't been there in years. The cryptic nature of the message made my instincts flare. Was it really Adam? And why now? Against my better judgment, I replied, confirming the meeting time. Whatever he needed to tell me, it felt important. Something in my gut told me this wasn't just a casual catch-up. The tone was too urgent, too deliberate. The next evening, I arrived at the pier early. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow across the water. A few seagulls circled overhead, and the only sounds were the waves lapping against the wooden beams of the dock. I stood near the railing, watching the sun dip lower. I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down on me, like a storm was on the horizon, and I wasn't sure if I was prepared for it. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Adam approaching, hands in his coat pockets. He looked different, leaner, older in a way that had nothing to do with age. He wore a solemn expression, and as he walked up to me, I could see the heaviness in his eyes. "Adam," I said, unsure of how to start, "it's good to see you." He nodded, stopping just a few feet away from me. "It's been a while," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "I wasn't sure if I should contact you, but I needed to." I studied his face, searching for clues about why he had reached out. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" Adam sighed, running a hand through his hair. He didn't answer right away, and for a moment I thought he might turn and walk away. But then he met my gaze, and I could see the turmoil beneath the surface. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this again," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "But there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been carrying for months, and I can't hold it in anymore." My pulse quickened. "What is it?" Adam took a deep breath. "It's about Laura." A chill ran down my spine at the mention of her name. "What about her?" "She's in prison." "She was in prison," Adam corrected. "But she's dead now." I blinked, the words not quite registering at first. "Dead? How?" Adam looked down at the ground, his jaw clenched. "She was found dead in her cell about 2 weeks ago. The official report says it was suicide, but I don't believe that." I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, confusion, and a twinge of something else, something darker. Laura was gone, the person who had caused so much pain, and yet Adam didn't seem at peace. "What do you mean you don't believe it?" I asked, stepping closer to him. Adam hesitated before speaking again, as if weighing his words carefully. "A few days before she died, I got a letter from her. She wrote to me from prison. I wasn't going to tell you about it, but after what happened, I think you need to know." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket and handed it to me. I unfolded it slowly, my heart racing as I scanned the handwritten note. Laura's familiar cursive filled the page, and as I read the words, my blood ran cold. "Adam, you think you've won, that everything's over, but you're wrong. There's more to this than you know. There are things I've done, secrets I've kept, that go beyond anything you could imagine. And now that I'm gone, those secrets will come to light. You can't hide from them. No one can. You'll see. Laura." I stared at the letter, my mind racing. What was she talking about? What secrets? I handed the letter back to Adam, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you think she was telling the truth?" I asked. Adam nodded slowly. "I don't know, but I can't shake the feeling that something else is going on. And the way she died, it doesn't add up. She wasn't the type to just give up, not like that. I think someone got to her." I felt a knot form in my stomach. But why? What could she have known that was worth killing her over? "That's what I need your help to figure out," Adam said, his voice pleading. "I know you've moved on, and I don't want to drag you back into this, but I don't trust anyone else. I need to know the truth, Claire." I looked out at the water, the waves crashing against the pier. This wasn't what I had expected when I agreed to meet Adam. I had thought this chapter of my life was closed. But now, it seemed like the story wasn't over. Not yet. I turned back to Adam, my resolve hardening. "Okay, I'll help you, but we need to be careful. If Laura was killed because of something she knew, then we could be next." Adam nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you." The investigation into Laura's death took us down a dark and twisted path, one that neither Adam nor I had anticipated. We started by digging into her prison records, trying to find out who she had been in contact with during her time behind bars. The list was surprisingly short, mostly lawyers and a handful of visitors. But there was one name that stood out, Michael Hartman. I didn't recognize the name, but Adam did. "He was one of her old business associates," Adam explained. "Back when she was still running scams with her ex-husband, Robert, Hartman had a reputation for being ruthless. A man who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty if it meant getting what he wanted. He had been involved in several shady deals with Laura and Robert, but he had always managed to stay just outside the law's reach. Why would Hartman be visiting Laura in prison? I asked, more to myself than to Adam. "I don't know," Adam replied. But whatever it wasn't good. We dug deeper into Hartman's history, looking for any connection between him and Laura's recent activities. It didn't take long to find something suspicious. A few months before Laura's arrest, Hartman had transferred a large sum of money into an offshore account, an account that Laura had access to. It looked like Laura had been working with Hartman again, even while she was in prison. But what were they planning? The more we uncovered, the more dangerous things became. Hartman was connected to a web of criminal activities, money laundering, fraud, and even suspected ties to organized crime. If Laura had been part of that, then her death might not have been a suicide after all. She could have been silenced to protect something much bigger. I tried to reach out to some of Hartman's known associates, but every lead seemed to dry up the moment I got close. People were scared to talk, and those who did only gave vague, unhelpful answers. One night, while I was reviewing some of the documents we had gathered, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, and when I answered, a low, gravelly voice spoke on the other end. "You're getting too close." The words sent a chill down my spine. "Who is this?" I demanded. "That doesn't matter," the voice replied. "What matters is that you stop digging. If you keep pushing, people are going to get hurt. Do you understand?" The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at my phone, my heart racing. I immediately called Adam, telling him what had happened. "We're in danger," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We need to be careful." Adam agreed, but neither of us was willing to back down. We had come too far to stop now. If Laura had been killed because of what she knew, then we needed to expose it. Hartman and his associates weren't going to get away with this, but the more we pushed, the more the danger escalated. We started receiving threatening letters, our phones were tapped, and we knew we were being followed. It felt like the walls were closing in on us, but we couldn't stop. Not now. The breakthrough came when we managed to get our hands on a series of encrypted emails between Laura and Hartman. It had taken some clever hacking on Jason's part, but once we decrypted the messages, everything became clear. Laura and Hartman had been involved in a massive fraud scheme, one that spanned several countries and involved millions of dollars. They had been laundering money through offshore accounts, using shell companies to hide their tracks. And it wasn't just about money. They had ties to dangerous people, people who wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect their interests. Laura had become a liability. She knew too much, and once she was in prison, she became a loose end that needed to be tied up. Hartman had arranged for her to be silenced before she could reveal everything. With the emails in hand, we finally had the proof we needed. We turned everything over to the authorities, and within days, Hartman was arrested. His empire came crashing down, and several of his associates were taken down with him. Laura's death was officially ruled a murder, and while it didn't bring her back, it brought some closure to Adam. He had the answers he needed, and the people responsible for her death were behind bars. In the weeks that followed, Adam and I both tried to move on from the ordeal. We had been through a lot together, and while the investigation had brought us closer, it also left us both exhausted and emotionally drained. One evening, as we sat together at a cafe, Adam looked at me with a small, tired smile. "I think it's finally over," he said, his voice filled with relief. I nodded, sipping my coffee. "It is. You can finally put it behind you." Adam was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Claire. You've been my rock through all of this." I smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "You've been stronger than you realize, Adam. You didn't need me as much as you think." He shook his head, his eyes full of gratitude. "Maybe, but I'm still grateful." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the world go by outside the cafe window. The storm had finally passed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace.